Friends, tonight we are witnessing one of the most extraordinary, unsettling, and strategically earth-shaking events of this entire war, an event that has not only shaken Moscow to its core, but has sent a ripple of shock through intelligence agencies around the world. Because what Ukraine accomplished in the last 24 hours is something no analyst, no military planner, and certainly no Kremlin official ever imagined possible. A long-range precision strike, executed deep inside the Russian capital, hitting not just any target, not an oil depot, not a radar site, not a military barracks, but a secret FSB base, a nerve center of Russia's internal security apparatus, a facility so hidden, so classified, so deeply embedded in the shadows of the intelligence world that even many Russian officials did not know its exact coordinates, and yet, somehow, Ukraine found it, mapped it, tracked it, and struck it with stunning accuracy, sending flames, smoke, and disbelief rising into the night sky over Moscow. And as those fireballs erupted, they did more than destroy infrastructure, they destroyed the illusion that Moscow, the heart of Russia's power, is untouchable. And this is the moment that has forced every intelligence agency from Washington to London, from Berlin to Tokyo, to reevaluate what they thought they knew about Ukraine's capabilities and Russia's vulnerabilities. Because this wasn't just a strike, this was a statement, a psychological blow delivered with surgical precision, a message written in fire that said, "We can reach the places you swore we never could." And friends, the timing of this strike could not have been more devastating for the Kremlin, because Russia right now is stretched thin on every front. Its air defense is redeployed to protect oil refineries after weeks of Ukrainian drone attacks, its logistics cracking under the weight of sanctions, its economy struggling, its Chinese partners growing silent, and its political elite increasingly paranoid. So when Ukraine struck the FSB's hidden base, it didn't just hit a building. It hit the psychological foundation of Putin's entire regime, the foundation built on fear, secrecy, and the myth of perfect control. Imagine the scene inside the Kremlin as emergency alarms rang out, generals rushing into situation rooms, intelligence chiefs flipping through incomplete reports, Putin demanding answers with a level of anger and disbelief that even his closest advisors had never witnessed before, because this attack wasn't supposed to be possible. Not according to Russia's own propaganda, not according to its air defense claims, not according to the myth that Moscow sits behind an invisible, impenetrable wall. And yet tonight that wall cracked, and with it cracked the confidence of those who believed they were protected by the shield of the FSB. And while Russia scrambled, Ukraine remained calm, deliberate, almost clinical, watching the chaos unfold in Moscow with the precision of a surgeon observing the success of an operation. Because make no mistake, this strike was not improvisation, this was strategy, the result of months of intelligence gathering, satellite mapping, cyber infiltration, and technological innovation. The kind of operation that only a nation fighting for its survival and its identity could execute with such courage and clarity. But friends, the real story isn't just the strike itself. The real story is the panic spreading through Moscow tonight. Panic that started inside the walls of the FSB and is now rippling outward into ministries, command centers, and regional governments. As officials realize the implications of what has happened, if Ukraine can hit this, what else can it hit? If drones can reach the capital, what else can they reach? If the FSB can be penetrated, what else is vulnerable? And these questions aren't being asked quietly anymore. They're being asked in hurried meetings, whispered in hallways, typed in encrypted chats, spoken behind closed doors with the kind of fear that authoritarian regimes work desperately to hide. Because for the first time since Putin came to power, the elite are considering something they never dared consider before, that Russia is not as safe as they were told, not as strong as they believed, and not as invincible as they pretended. And this fear is more dangerous to the Kremlin than any missile or drone, because authoritarian power rests not on truth but on belief, the belief that the leader is strong, the system is stable, the security forces are omnipotent, and the enemy is far away. But tonight those beliefs are collapsing. And as they collapse, they expose the cracks that have been forming for months, falling morale in the military, collapsing recruitment, rising economic pressure, oligarchs quietly moving money out of the country, provinces complaining about fuel shortages, and China stepping back from energy commitments. The strike on the FSB didn't create these problems, it illuminated them, magnified them, and accelerated them, turning slow-burning tensions into a blazing crisis. And while Russia tries to contain the fallout, censor footage, rewrite narratives, and control the flow of information, the truth has already spread. The war has reached Moscow. The front line has moved into Russia itself. And the Kremlin, for all its power, cannot stop what has begun. And tonight, as Moscow sits on high alert, as air defense batteries reposition across the city, as helicopters patrol the skyline, as citizens film distant explosions with trembling hands, one thing has become clear to the entire world. Ukraine has changed the rules of this war. And Russia is no longer fighting from a position of strength, it is reacting, scrambling, adjusting, and fearing what the next 48 hours might bring, because if Ukraine could strike here, at this depth, at this precision, then no target in Russia is off limits anymore. And that realization has shaken the Kremlin more profoundly than any battlefield defeat ever could. Friends, as we move into the second part of this extraordinary story, we must understand that the strike on the secret FSB base was not an isolated event, not a one-night shock, but the beginning of a chain reaction reverberating through every level of Russian power. Because the psychological earthquake that started in that single moment has now spread far beyond Moscow, shaking the confidence of regional governors, rattling the military command structure, and sending quiet waves of panic through Russia's elite, who for the first time are asking themselves whether the walls of their own system are beginning to crack. And tonight, new intelligence confirmed quietly by U.S. officials shows emergency troop movements around the Russian capital, rapid redeployment of air defense batteries, and unusual encrypted communications between high-ranking Kremlin officials, the kind of signals analysts normally detect during moments of national crisis, not during a war Russia insists it is winning. And inside the FSB itself, the aftermath of the strike is even more devastating, with internal reports leaking out that the blast destroyed multiple secure servers, corrupted surveillance archives, and wiped out portions of Russia's domestic intelligence database, effectively blinding key branches of the security service at a moment when the Kremlin desperately needs stability and control. And as technicians scramble to recover lost data, senior FSB commanders are quietly turning against each other, each blaming the other for security negligence, for intelligence failures, for air defense blind spots, for gaps that should never have existed. And that infighting is not just a sign of dysfunction, it is a sign of fear, because in authoritarian systems, failure is not a lesson, it is a death sentence. And tonight, many inside the FSB believe they are being set up to take the fall for a strike the Kremlin cannot publicly explain. Meanwhile, Putin, isolated in secure rooms and surrounded by advisors who are too afraid to tell him the full truth, is demanding action, demanding arrests, demanding answers, demanding someone to blame, and that desperation has triggered a purge inside Russia's intelligence community, with officers detained, interrogated, reassigned, or quietly removed, a purge that further weakens the very institutions Putin depends on to keep his regime afloat. And friends, what makes this even more dangerous for the Kremlin is that Ukraine is not slowing down. U.S. analysts now believe Ukraine has mapped dozens of similar targets inside Russia, strategic nodes linked to logistics, intelligence, fuel distribution, and military coordination, meaning the FSB strike may be the first act of a much larger campaign designed to destabilize Russia from within, forcing it to fight on multiple internal fronts it never prepared for. And as these vulnerabilities become visible, Russia's allies are beginning to step back. China, once a lifeline for Russian oil and trade, has now quietly halted several refinery contracts, citing market instability. But analysts know the truth: Beijing is distancing itself from a partner it no longer trusts to maintain internal control, because China's foreign policy is built on caution, not loyalty. And when the Kremlin looks weak, Beijing looks away. India is also hedging. shifting more of its energy imports back toward the Middle East and Africa, unwilling to tie its economy to a collapsing Russian energy network that could fall apart if one more major facility is hit. And in Europe, leaders who once feared a united Russian military machine are now watching its unraveling with a sense of vindication, noting that the Kremlin's power was never as solid as it claimed, and that Ukraine, a country fighting for its survival, has now exposed the myth of Russian dominance better than any Western intelligence agency ever did. And friends, as global markets react to energy prices fluctuating, oil traders tightening risk assessments, shipping companies rerouting vessels, the full economic consequences of the FSB strike begin to reveal themselves. Because when a country loses the world's confidence, the effects are immediate. Investors pull back, buyers hesitate, allies reassess, and enemies advance, and tonight, Russia is facing all four at once. But the deepest damage is not economic, it is psychological, internal, corrosive, the kind of damage that spreads through whispers, doubt, hesitation, and fear. Because ordinary Russians are now waking up to the reality that the war they were told was happening far away, safely beyond the borders, is now on their doorstep, inside their capital, hitting their intelligence headquarters. And that realization is breaking the illusion Putin has used to hold power for 23 years, the illusion that he alone keeps Russia safe. And once that illusion breaks, the foundation of authoritarian control collapses, not loudly at first, but quietly, through the slow erosion of belief, through the moment when a soldier hesitates before following an order, when an officer stops pretending he trusts his superior, when a bureaucrat questions whether the government actually knows what it's doing, and when citizens begin to whisper that perhaps the system is weaker than they were told. And tonight, those whispers are growing louder, spreading across social media despite censorship, spreading through families, through apartment blocks, through office corridors, because Russians saw the smoke with their own eyes, heard the alarms with their own ears. And no amount of propaganda can erase the images of fire rising from a building that was supposed to be secret and secure. And as all of this unfolds, Ukraine is preparing its next move, its commanders analyzing the shockwave inside Russia, understanding that every psychological fracture creates new opportunities. Every moment of panic opens a new window. Every sign of internal dysfunction offers a new target. Because the battlefield is no longer defined by geography, it is defined by confidence. And tonight, it is Russia's confidence that has been shattered. And friends, as we move forward in this developing story, one truth is becoming undeniable. The strike on the secret FSB base may be remembered not just as a military success, not just as a strategic breakthrough, but as the moment the Kremlin's aura of control began to crumble, the moment Moscow realized the war was no longer something it could manage, contain, or control, the moment when Ukraine proved that even the most powerful systems can crack from the inside, and the moment the world understood that the balance of this war has shifted in ways no one, least of all Russia, was prepared to face.